Right.
So last week, welcome everyone. Last week we did part one, kind of unpacking not just the biology, but some of the research and a lot of observations based on, Serena, your experience, based on all the research you've done of kind of here's what's happening biologically. I thought was very intriguing in a person's brain and seeing particularly that chart, that seeing depression, anxiety, and all that was really helpful for me. So that was kind of part one. So it's pretty meaty. We have a link for that on our YouTube channel, and we'll record this one and then put part two on there as well. But today, Serena, from my understanding, this is where, okay, kind of pulling back the curtain says, okay, here's what's happening, but here's what we can do about it on that as people who are over youth workers or influence teenagers or parents or anything like that. So Serena, welcome back. We're glad that you showed up again for part two. We had
Wouldn't miss it. Wouldn't miss it.
Yeah. So I'm just going to give it away. Go ahead.
Yeah, fantastic. So welcome back, everybody. And this is going to be, I think, just a quick review, just super fast of kind of what we looked at last week, just that reminder, looking at a couple of those pictures, not all of them, and not diving into everything. And then I'm just going to try to give you some really practical things that you can do as workers in youth ministry to help, and things that you can share with parents as well, that are coming to you and talking about, hey, my kid is struggling with this or that, and just give you a couple of tools that you can tap into. It's definitely not going to make you mental health experts by any means, but it hopefully is enough to help you and your youth volunteers maybe not completely freak out when someone is talking with them about things they're struggling with. So as it relates to anxiety and depression. So let me share my screen here real quick. And you'll see we're just going to pick up right where we left off last week. And so as just for a quick review, I want to just remind you of those brain images that we saw last week. And you can kind of see here, I want to make sure I can get that toolbar off. Doesn't want to go away. Kyle, do you know how to make it go away? It usually just goes away and it doesn't want to do that.
What toolbar are you seeing?
I'm seeing the screen share toolbar. You guys are not seeing one? Okay.
Well, yeah.
Then we'll ignore it.
Okay.
Okay, so just a real quick reminder, that first picture, remember, shows us how the brain actually is not stopped growing, it's not stopped developing, it's not fully functioning in all its capacity until we are in our mid-20s. And so that just kind of shows that slow progression over growth and development. That second picture there on the right is a reminder about all the different centers in the brain and what they are responsible for. And then that third picture in the bottom left is a reminder about that emotional control center. And we talked about that being sort of the thumb in our brain, right? And that this center is the one that it activates our flight, fight, freeze response. I can never say that without really slowing down. And it also is the one that like triggers all of our emotional behaviors, emotionally based behaviors that normally in a typically functioning, fully developed brain would connect then to this part that kind of wraps around the top, particularly this part right behind our forehead that allows us to make decisions about what we do with all the emotional stuff that's coming from inside the brain. And so just a quick reminder on that. This is that picture that Kyle mentioned of the different brain scans in different mental health situations. And so you can kind of get a sense of what's firing. Remember, the top of the brain that you see there is this part right behind the forehead. The bottom part of the brain image is the back part of the head, usually where vision and visual stimuli are processed by the brain, right? Our eyes take things in and shoot it all the way back to the back. And so you can kind of see all of the areas around the brain that are firing and functioning and connected in these different mental health states. and what isn't functioning, as identified by those black areas on the scans. The red areas are an overfiring. Things are really off the charts. The yellow areas are sort of more than normal, what we would like to see in these kinds of images. And then the blue is where it's under functioning, and black is there is no functioning. Okay. All right. So what do I do with this? I'm a youth pastor. I'm a youth leader. I don't do this every day. How do I respond? I'm not a mental health expert, right? And this is where we, as just volunteers and service workers in our churches and our ministries, can start to feel really overwhelmed, because there's a lot of information in that. And people, doctors and psychiatrists will go to school for 12 plus years to learn how to deal with this. And I've been to school I have 2 degrees. And so people have invested their whole lives in learning how to do this. And you're like, I'm just here on a Wednesday or a Sunday. I just love kids and I want to be with them. So what do I do? The very first tip I have for you is never tell a person who is activated to just calm down. And we do a lot of this without even saying calm down. We'll say things like, well, take a deep breath. And we're going to talk about why we can't tell someone who's in an anxious state to take a deep breath. When we say things like, oh, be okay, or it's not that big a deal, we're essentially telling them, well, calm down. It's okay, and we want to be really careful that we don't send those kinds of messages. And so the other thing is, that person in depression who's really struggling with that lack of ability to get out of bed, the lack of ability to kind of organize their thoughts and figure out, okay, where do I even start? Where is this coming from? These are the young people and adults alike who are kind of stuck in that, I don't even know what's happening. I don't even know how I feel right now. So when we tell them these really simple kinds of commands, what we're doing is essentially kind of minimizing the reality that they're in. And we're forgetting that their brain is actually overfiring or underfiring. And so giving them another command actually adds to the stress on the brain. And so we have to actually engage in a partner process with them in order to help them get to a place where they can talk it through. And I'm going to show you how to do that, how to really ground that person in what's happening right now. You're with me. Let's figure this out together. And we're going to be partners in that. But I do want to just really caution you. And if you're training your youth workers, just really caution folks, be very careful to tell them, well, just, don't worry about that. Or let's just calm down and we'll figure it out. Those kinds of things will actually work against you when you're trying to help a young person or really anybody of any age kind of work through these scenarios. So that's my first caution for you. So what do we want to do then? Serena, you've said what we don't want to do. We do want to normalize this, right? We saw the statistics last week about just how frequently these issues and these concerns are realities for young people. This is not something they are imagining. And we talked a little bit last week about being able to help a young person learn, okay, is this real depression or is this sadness? Is this anxiety that because I'm stressed out and I'm nervous about something that most people would be stressed out and nervous about? I've got finals coming up, or I've got the championship game on Friday, those kinds of things. Those are intended to cause us stress. That's normal. That may not be anxiety that requires us to get treatment for it, right? Depression because of a breakup or a death in the family or some sort of stressful situation at home where my mood is just kind of sad and I'm just kind of down and I'm off that day, that may not be clinical depression. That may just be a very normal kind of human experience. And so we talked last week about how to help young people kind of make that clarification for themselves, and even just to learn how to use the right words for what it is they're feeling. In doing that, in normalizing this, we do absolutely need to remember that young people require belonging. You may remember from college hearing about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's typically depicted as a triangle where we have those basic survival needs on that very bottom rung of the triangle of food, clothing, shelter, water, those kinds of things that help us live from day to day. Well, as you go up just a couple of levels, because you've got safety and security is level 2. All people need to feel safe and secure in their environments. But level 3 is actually just love and belonging. This is really important for teenagers. Developmentally, they are at that love and belonging stage where they are trying to figure out their entire job. According to every psychological theorist that's ever existed, the job of the teenager is to figure out where and how they fit into the world around them, right? So anytime something happens in a teen's life that they perceive to be happening only to them, or an issue that they are the only one struggling with because they don't hear anybody else talking about it, they're going to now feel like I am somehow ousted from all of my peers, and I'm somehow drastically different from all of my peers. Now, we don't hear teens say, wow, I feel so different. I feel so ousted, and I just don't fit with anybody. We don't hear them say that. What we hear them feel is, I feel like I'm crazy. I don't understand what's happening, and we have to really send them the message, you are not crazy. Your brain is just trying to balance everything happening in it in a different way, but that doesn't make you crazy. And sending a very clear message to them that they are absolutely not alone in that struggle. Having some information at your ready to be able to prove that to them with authenticity is really helpful. You can say to them, you know what, I have been a youth worker at this church for 3 years. And I can promise you, you are not the first young person that has come to me and told me that they're struggling with these kinds of things. I've worked, or I've been around teenagers my whole life. And I can promise you, every year I've got at least 10 that are feeling the same way. And anything you can do, anything you can say to them that will give them some real sort of tangible kinds of ideas that say, okay, I am not a person here on a deserted island all by myself talking to a volleyball, if you get the Castaway reference, right? So make sure they know they're not crazy. Their brains are just working a little bit differently, and that's okay because their brain is not finished developing yet. Like, that's the really important part, right? It's okay because your brain's not finished developing yet, and we can work with it. It can be treated. You can talk to people. There are things we can do if you need that, and you're not alone. Normalizing a situation or a circumstance is very different than minimizing it. Minimizing a situation sends the message that says, this is not as important to me as it is to you. Or it sends the message that you are making this more important than it needs to be. So we have to be very careful that we are normalizing it, that we are saying your experience, what you're telling me that you feel, what you're telling me that your body is experiencing physically, that's normal. Like there's a lot of people out there that have that same situation. And what you're telling me is also really important to me, because I don't want to see you stuck in this place of struggle all the time. And so we have to send the message that they are important, that their challenge is important, that all of the things, all of the questions and the issues that a young person is kind of weighing out is important. It's important for them, and it's important for you. And if their issues, their challenges, their concerns, their questions are important to you, then you're also sending the message that that young person is important to you, and that they are worth you taking the time to just stop and talk to them and stop and listen to them. And when your primary need as an adolescent is a sense of love and belonging, that is exactly what they need. They need to know that this person I'm sharing my story with cares enough about me to actually spend some time in this space with me and allow me to experience this. And they're still going to love me anyway. And so we're going to talk about that as we move forward. So normalize it, don't minimize it, would be my first tip. The next thing you want to do from a skill base, and I'm going to show you how to do this in a few different ways, is to really do what we call ground the youth in the moment. So we want to make sure that this person is thinking clearly about where they are, who they are with, what they are saying and what they are feeling in the world around them and the environment immediately around them right now. So a good image for this is sort of that pin drop on our, Google Maps or whatever, right? Or when we were kids, we probably all went to the mall and found the big sign that said, you are here, and then and you could map out kind of how to get to where the store you wanted to go to. That's what we're doing when we are grounding a person in the moment. We are helping them to say, okay, I'm here right now. And right now, then I can plan how I want to move forward to get where I want to go. The plan is always adjustable. It's always flexible. And we can, if we get off track, we can get back on track, right? If I make a wrong turn, I can get back. My Siri will recalculate and get me back on track. So it's just about having a plan, but we can't plan where we're going until we know where we are, right? We have to know our starting point. So grounding the person in the moment is about helping them to see and remember where they are right now, who they're with, what's happening around them, and what they are really feeling that is factual right now. Because emotions are displayed through behavior and biological responses. The behavior and the biological responses are facts. The emotions are not facts. Emotions are based on our perception of what's happening around us, right? So if I'm angry, it's because I have a perception about what maybe my husband or my children have done, right? Or what's happened at work that has made me angry about it. That's just my feeling, because my coworker or my husband may not have the same response, right? So because we can each have very different responses to that, we know that it's not fact. But if I throw a punch at somebody, that's a fact. That's a behavior. Everybody around me can see it. Other people can feel the impact of the punch. That's a fact. I can't deny that a punch happened, right? But I can deny that I'm angry. Does that make sense? When I say feelings are not facts, but behaviors and biological responses are facts. We can measure what your brain is doing when you're angry, but I can't measure your emotion of anger. Yeah, Shelley. Oh, you're on mute.
So it occurs to me that the fact that you have an emotion is also a fact, right? Like the fact is, I am angry right now.
Yes.
Right. So that gets confusing, but like we can acknowledge the emotions as a fact, but not necessarily that they lead us to a conclusion.
It is a fact for you that you can say, I am angry right now. But how many times have we misinterpreted someone else's emotional state?
Right.
So like if my husband is super quiet one day and he's just not really talking a lot, he's not really engaging with the family, I will often assume that for some reason he's upset. And he's like, I'm totally fine. I am perceiving his emotion. Whereas for him, the fact is I'm not mad, but for me, the fact is he's mad, or the perception that he's mad. So we have to be really careful that we are teaching young people to say, I feel this way. It's a fact for me based on how I feel about it, how I perceive it, but it still may not be true. Right? My husband he's not mad at me. He's just having an off day, but he's not mad.
Right.
And so even the emotion definition there is not fact. Right? It's still based on our perception. Now, if my husband were banging around the house, slamming cabinet doors, slamming bedroom doors, things like that, if he got in the car and sped off and the wheels squealed, things like that, or he's yelling or whatever, those might be behaviors that seem to confirm my perception about his emotions. So I can talk about the behaviors, but I can't tell him, listen, you can't be angry right now. What I can say is, I really don't like it when you slam doors in the house.
Right.
Do you know what I'm saying? So getting them to understand the difference between how they're feeling and their behavior. And I think, honestly, this is going to be a real challenge for us in our current society because everybody is talking about how we feel so much. And we're making really big decisions based on how we feel in underdeveloped brains that are perhaps misfiring and taking in a lot of extra stimuli. And it's all being based on a feeling. instead of a fact, a thing that we can point to. So, okay, so we're grounding the youth in the moment. So how do we do that? Two ways. One, we want to engage the person with their senses in a very clear way. God gave us ways to experience the world around us through our five senses. And so this 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 exercise is a really great tip that you can kind of keep in your back pocket. It's easy to teach to people. You could even print out cards, with this kind of stuff on it, and or posters, and have it around in your youth room, things like that. But it's a way to re-engage you with the senses that God gave us. So what you do is if that person is kind of escalated, they're irritated, they're kind of all up in the feelings, right? That's what the young person would say. You want to get them out of the feelings and back into reality. And reality is things that I can sense, right? So we talk about 5 things that you can see. So if I have a student who's talking to me and they're anxious and they're just nervous and I can't even get them to make a good sentence, right? They're kind of all over the place. I might say, you know what? Let's just take a beat. I want you to look around the room right now, and I want you to tell me 5 things that you can see around us right now. And so they might say, well, I can see some filing cabinets. I can see a purple cup, a cell phone, a clock, and a TV, right? Okay, great, that you can see those things. Now, can you tell me 4 things that you can feel? Well, what do you mean? I want 4 things that you can feel with your hands. Okay, well, I can feel the table. I feel my sweater on my arm. I feel the warmth in the air because it's hot in here. I feel the sunshine. I feel a breeze. 4 things I can feel that's giving me a touch sensation on my body, right? Okay, now tell me 3 things that you can hear. Oh, well, I just heard the bells going off because it was noon on campus, and I hear the trees rustling, and I hear the sound of the clock ticking, right? So just 3 things you can hear. Okay, what about 2 things you can smell? I can smell the cafeteria, and I can smell the carpet, whatever, right? And then, okay, tell me 1 thing. And this is where you can go a couple different directions with it. Tell me 1 thing about yourself that you like, or tell me 1 thing that you can taste. Either one of those works, right? And taste is good if you've happened to be in a situation where maybe they're chewing gum or you've had snack or whatever, but sometimes taste can feel a little bit harder for people. And so getting them to ground themselves in something positive about themselves in a moment when they are feeling completely out of control can be really helpful. So you have a couple of options there, but it's always 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch or feel, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and then 1 thing that you can either say positive about yourself or 1 thing that you can taste. Just working through that process actually triggers your brain to come out of that place of total depression and shutdown, or the total anxiety and complete overfiring, and you get it back into a place where this part of the brain is working, because you can't answer these questions until the prefrontal cortex is thinking. You have to be observing your space. You have to be paying attention to what you hear, what you touch, what you can smell, right? You can't do those things when you're not in your cognitive part of your brain. Just doing that activity alone will take you about 10 steps closer to being able to have a conversation with a young person who is currently just crying hysterically or super angry and can't think about anything other than the thing that they're angry about. Does that make sense? Okay. So the next tool I want to give you then is controlled breathing. This is very different than telling someone, take a deep breath. The reality is, if someone is highly activated and highly agitated right now, if you tell them, okay, we're going to take a deep breath and calm down, which is our very normal tendency. I even almost tripped up and said it when I was showing you the don't tell me to calm down slide. It's very natural for us to say, take a deep breath. The reason we want to say that is because what we want to do is flood the body with oxygen so that it can function more properly, function the way God intended it to function. The problem with that is we can't flood the body with oxygen because right now the body is so full of stress hormones, all those hormones and chemicals we talked about last week, that it can't take in any more oxygen. It can't process any more oxygen. And so if you've ever seen someone having a panic attack, you often see them breathing really fast, right? They're almost hyperventilating. And so what you need to do is help them control their breathing enough so that you can flood the body with oxygen. The very act of breathing helps to detox all of the cells in your body and particularly in your brain really quickly. And so one of the ways we're going to actually just practice this because it's very easy to do. There's two methods that are proven to do this. So what you want to say to the person who is really agitated, they're not breathing well, maybe they're crying or they're angry and they're just kind of in that, you know, if you ever seen a really angry young person, they tend to get kind of in that, especially boys will get in that kind of bull face, like, you know, they're just like angry in their face, right? And so you want to get them to calm down because when they're in that mode physically, they're actually not breathing, right? They're just taking in little bits of breath, but they're not really breathing. A person who is crying really hard also is not breathing. It's often why people who are crying really hard will end up actually vomiting or will end up coughing profusely because they're just not breathing and now their body is starving for oxygen. And so we want to get them to a place where they can control the breathing. Yeah, Kyle.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's awesome, you know, when we're not in the moment. And I love what you said.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, it's, we naturally say, hey, calm down because we think we're giving them comfort in that. So my question is, okay, does this breathing happen the moment, let's say you're in a lobby and it's happening, or is it better to take them off to the side and they're more off away from the crowd and the crazes and then work on this stuff? Like, when does this actually happen?
I think we do both. I think the first thing we have to do is figure out, can we control it right then in that moment? And if you can, it's okay for you to stop, take 2 seconds and say, okay, I want you to blow out for me really quickly so that we can get you to a place where you can breathe better. And notice I said, I want you to breathe out for me, right? Because that person who's not breathing, they are holding their breath. They're not taking in anymore. Well, what's the breath that is filling our lungs when we are holding our breath? It's actually carbon dioxide, right? It's the thing that we breathe out. And so we need to clear out the space first. So what you can say is, I want you to blow out really hard for me. And then we will get out of this space and we'll go somewhere where you can breathe a little easier. Right? So get them to breathe out. When you get to the new place, because now you've gotten them, if they're thinking about blowing out, they're back in that cognitive part of the brain, right? I would say angry kids, if you can get them to blow out, it'll help calm their body, their nervous system down really quickly. And because often when you're throwing punches and you're angry, things like that, your body, you're just tensed up, right? So we have to release some of that. Imagine like a teapot. So, okay, so controlled breathing, and we can practice this real quick. So we want to take an inhale for 4 counts. We want to hold it for 7 and then exhale for 8. So inhale for 4, hold it for 7, exhale for 8. Right? And you can just count 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 in your head. Like you don't have to do, but it's inhale for 4, hold for 7, blow out for 8. And you actually want to help them do this at least 3 times if you can get them to do it. For a panic attack situation, you may not be able to get them all the way through the cycle the first time around, or even the second time around. You may start the cycle with needing to blow out first, right? Especially if you have that person who's been hyperventilating and they're like I can't. Okay. I want you to blow out for 8 seconds. That will clear out the lungs. It will make space. Then you can get them to inhale for 4 seconds. Hold it. The act of holding it is conscious. They have to be in their cognitive brain to do that. Otherwise, it's involuntary breathing, and then they can breathe out again. Trying to do this 3 times, floods the body with new, fresh oxygen, and it allows the brain's cells and all of the cardiac cells, the lung cells, everything throughout the whole body to function better. So once you can get their breathing under control, you can have a different conversation. Candle breathing is a way to get them to blow out when they can't just respond to that phrase, right? If I can say to my girl, okay, I want you to blow really hard out for me, right? She can't do that. I'm going to say, I want you to pretend that you're blowing out a candle. And as they calm down, then I want you to say, I want you to blow out that candle really slowly. Right. And it's the act of slowing it down and getting them to think about the breathing. Both of these exercises, the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 and the controlled breathing, only serve to get the person functioning back in the cognitive part of their brain where they can think about what is happening. When they're highly escalated or they are really depressed and they can't get out of bed, they're not in the thinking part of their brain. Right. So we have to get them to think about it again. Okay. Do you have any questions about the breathing or the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1? Yeah.
Just as so you have made the clear distinction between somebody who's like anxiety and depression and like the severe form. I'm guessing as a parent of young kids whose development's probably in that 5-year-old, I mean, do these same principles apply to small panic attacks, just normal acting out?
Yeah. It like with small kids, I remember when my kids were little, if I didn't cut the sandwich right, it could be like a major catastrophe, right? So you can do the same thing. I can't hear you talk to me about how you want me to cut your sandwich when you're crying so hard. So can you blow out a big breath towards a candle for me? And you might even with a little kid, like hold your finger up. Can you blow my candle out for me so that I can hear you talk to me? It's same kind of concept. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yep. Okay. So this is kind of back to Kyle's question a little bit earlier. You also absolutely want to make room, right? Anytime you have a kid who is really emotional, they're really crying. And this, I see this a lot at camps and, youth conferences and things like that. You have 1 or 2 kids that get really emotional through the worship service and maybe the altar call kind of situation. And they're God's dealing with them, right? They're working with things. But what happens then is all their friends come around, particularly girls. This is really bad for girls. All the friends come around, everybody's hugging, everybody's close. When we as adults come to pray with them, oftentimes you will see adults maybe just do kind of the one hand on the shoulder. We're praying, but we've left some space. That's because we have an acknowledgement of the personal bubble that young people don't have, right? So if you are really helping, you want to be in the moment with that person who at those events is really emotional because God's dealing with them in some way, try to give them space, make room for that to happen, right? And encourage their friends, make room. We don't need 5 people standing right around them, hugging them, putting them in like a little huddle to help them feel safe, especially if it's a person who has that tendency toward the uncontrollable crying or the uncontrollable breathing of anxiety. We do want to make sure there's space. So see if you can get them to kind of come out of the crowd a little bit, come over to the side where there's more physical room for them to breathe. The room is going to be cooler in that area. There's going to be better oxygen flow when there's not 400 people standing around, things like that, or even 3 people. You just kind of want to get them off to the side a little bit. If it is a person who is having a genuine panic attack in that moment, you need to get them to a completely separate space, and you need to not have their friends follow them. right? Because now we need to get them to a place where not only are they grounded, but you can have a private conversation with them. Now, private does not mean secluded. I do not recommend, nor do I encourage adults to be in seclusion with young people, right? It's just not smart. It's not safe. So private can be off in a corner by yourself. If the friends come up, you say, you know what, we're going to just take some time and it's just going to be her and I, or him and I talking right now. And we'll talk with, there'll be a time where he can share with you later. And so we really want to protect that space and create an opportunity for you to engage with them in this process that is meaningful, and it communicates how important they are. Remember, that belonging piece comes in, right? If you make space for them and you to have a conversation, then you've communicated to them that they are valuable enough for you to do that. So that my encouragement there is make room for the conversation. And then disperse any observers or spectators. Okay, this is where I kind of debated, like, what order do I want to put this in? So because normalizing is so important, right? As a young person starts to talk to you about, you know what, my anxiety is really ramped up, because they will use these terms now. 15 years ago, kids were not saying my anxiety is amped up, right? They were saying, I don't know what's going on. I'm just so stressed. Now they're saying the words anxiety and depression. And so you have to use more discernment to funnel that out. But what's really important then is that when we're normalizing them, we give them real life examples, things that they can recognize and people they can see that says, yes, you're right. I'm not alone, and I'm not crazy, and I'm not doing this all by myself. There's a lot of other people out there. One of the ways you can do that is by talking with them about celebrities or people they know that have the same challenges. And so I've given you a couple of links, and I'm going to send this to Kyle so he can email it out to folks, the PowerPoint. But I've given you a couple links there that you can click on. These are actual celebrities that your young people might know who they are, that have openly talked about their challenges with either anxiety or depression or both. There are a lot out there. I am not one to advocate celebrity culture, but this is an easy way to tell people, okay, but you know what? These people who do big things have the same struggle. It's totally normal, right? And if you can share how you have experienced similar events, if that's a part of your story, and you feel comfortable with that, I invite you to share that with a young person, but do it really authentically. When we say to a young person or a person who is struggling in any way, man, I get it, or I understand, that's got to be really hard, unless you can back that up with some sort of proof that you actually do get it, it's not authentic and they won't receive it. It feels like you're just saying it to say it, right? You don't understand because you've not been there. And even though I and my best friend may have been experiencing the exact same thing, how we perceive it is different. So even though I can imagine her perception of it or her feelings around it, I don't understand exactly how she's feeling because we're two different people. And like Shelly and I were talking earlier, our perception of how another person feels is not fact. So to just say, man, I get it, I understand, we're pretending that we know something that we can't know. The only person who can really know what we're feeling is Jesus. And that's really hard for young people to grasp. So try to be as authentic as you possibly can. And it is okay for you to say to a kid too, listen, I've never felt this way. The things you're saying to me, I've never felt that way, but I can imagine how hard it is based on how hard you're telling me it is. Like, I believe you when you tell me that this is really tough. I hear that. That's very different than saying, I understand if I've never had depression. Does that make sense? So being really authentic, and if you don't know how to respond, say you don't know how to respond. Kids will respect you for being honest with them about that. It's okay for you to say, man, your story seems really hard. I know that there's some ways we can get you some help. I don't know what those ways are right now, but what I do know is that you're important enough to me that I'm going to walk through it with you, and I'm going to try to figure it out with you. But I don't have the answer today. I'll do what I can to help you. That I don't know yet, and we'll figure it out. Right? Kids will really respect you being able to, as an adult, say, I don't know something. So, all right. And then you can offer some scriptural examples too. And there are 2 examples from scripture specific to anxiety and depression that I really like to give to young people. And I've seen young people respond really well to it. The first is the prophet Elijah, which is depicted in that first painting there. Elijah became so depressed that he was actually suicidal. When he was running from Jezebel and he had been doing, the prophet gig for a while, everybody was ignoring him. He was just frustrated. He was tired. He was exhausted. He was scared. He sat down by a tree and he said, God, basically just kind of said, God, just kill me now. Like, just take me, right? I just don't want to live anymore. And God goes through this whole story. I think it's in 2 Kings about bringing him an angel 3 separate times. And it always cracks me up when I can tell somebody, and usually I can get a little laugh out of a kid when I say, you know what the angel's response was? Told Elijah to take a nap and have a snack 3 times. So let's grab a snack and we can talk, and usually that's enough too to kind of get them out of the seriousness of the situation and into a place where, okay, now we can think differently. Our brain is engaged differently. And most people kind of get a little chuckle out of that. Have a snack and a nap. And typically we wake up and we feel a little bit better. It's not going to be fixed, but we might feel a little bit better. King David is the other one. And so the second painting here is the Sorrow of David painting. And this is really depicting that moment in scripture after David had really messed up when he took advantage of Bathsheba and killed Uriah. The prophet Nathan had confronted him. He'd been told that the baby he had conceived with Bathsheba is going to die. And David is in despair. Like, you see scripture and he is just torn up. He doesn't eat for several days. He is just in this place of total despair and like, I just don't know what I can do, but I'm going to try everything in my power. And all the people around him, he's not eating, he's not getting out of bed, he's not doing all the king things he's supposed to be doing, and people are worried about it. That sounds like depression, right? When we're not doing all the things that we're supposed to be doing and we're in just this deep despair. And so we kind of see David pushing through that. And there's so many examples in Psalms of the psalmist really just crying out from this place of, I don't know what to do with all these things that I'm feeling. My heart is hurting, right? And crying out to God for attention and support. And so offering the connection for young people to these characters in scripture, and helping them to see that, listen, these are not new challenges of 2022, right? Anxiety and depression did not come up because of the pandemic. It's always been a part of our story. You can talk about, there are lots of other examples too that you can pull out. There's several Bible studies even that talk about these challenges, anxiety and depression. And so there's lots of things you can pull out of scripture to really kind of help make that connection for a young person. And it's about helping them to see that God doesn't see their challenge as something to be ashamed of. God sees their challenge as something to bring to him. Right. And in both of these situations, both Elijah and David, God sent people. He sent another creature, right? Either the angel that showed up to Elijah or the actual people that were coming to David and saying, King, how can we help you? We want you to eat, right? And so you have that connection there too of, it's okay. God sends us people to help us. God sends us opportunities to reach out for support. And it's right here in scripture and we can't deny it. Right. And so for you, if you've got any person that is really struggling with this idea of, I might need help, but am I supposed to need help because I'm a Christian? Aren't I supposed to just be able to pray my way through this? These are really good examples to help make it okay for them to reach out for help, because both of these men in scripture needed help. Also really significant, I think, for girls naturally have a little bit easier time asking for help than guys do. And so the fact that both of these characters are men, if you are struggling with young men or adult men in your church who are really struggling with something and need to know that it's okay to ask for help, these two characters are really important for them to know about as well. Okay, so once you've got the youth grounded, you've got them controlled breathing, you've maybe gotten them off, to the side where they're in a little bit more space, you've got some room to talk. Now you can invite them to share their story, with you. You're not asking them a lot of questions about, well, what's wrong? What's going on? Tell me about it, until you get them to a place where they're thinking again, right? We don't want to ask those questions when they're stuck in the overfiring or the underfiring route. We want to get them back into the cognitive part of their brain. So now when you say, when you are inviting them to talk with you, instead of saying what's wrong, try really hard to say, can you tell me a little bit about what you're feeling? Or can you tell me about what's going on in your body right now? You seem really anxious. Can you tell me about it? And saying what's wrong sends a message that something is broken, sends a message that something is damaged, sends a message that this is not okay, that you're feeling this way. And so we want to ask a very intentional question about, can you tell me what's going on in your body right now? Can you tell me what you're feeling? Can you share your story with me? How is God working with you right now? It seems like you're kind of amped up about some things. Can you tell me what's on your mind? These are great ways to say the same, to ask them to share their story, but without saying what's wrong with you. Another great example of that question is to ask what happened to you. And this is particularly helpful for people where trauma has been a part of their story. Instead of saying, what's wrong with you, just to say, well, can you tell me what happened? It opens the door for them to share very differently. If you ask them those questions, though, and the response is, I don't know, my encouragement to you is to not be discouraged. Just ask the question in a different way. Right? So if you have said, would you like to tell me your story? Would you like to tell me what's on your heart? Well, I don't know. Okay, well, I can tell that you're really emotional right now. So can you start by just telling me maybe what you're feeling in your body? Like, can you tell me what parts of your body feel like they're upset right now? Well, my stomach hurts. Okay. That sometimes is a sign that you're just really nervous to tell your story. Is that true? You can ask that question. So change it up. If you get the I don't know, try not to be super discouraged and feel like you can't get an answer then. The truth is the answer I don't know is an indicator to you that they're not yet in the thinking part of their brain. Right? So ask a different question to get them back in that thinking part of the brain. Another example could be, I've noticed the last few weeks at youth group, you just really seem to not like talking as much. You don't seem to be having as much fun with your friends. Am I reading that right? Is that true? And they'll tell you yes or no. But see, what you've done there is you've given them specific things to think about so that they can speak to it. Right? And the more you ask specific questions, the more they go into that cognitive mode. And then you can, after a few moments, then you can say, well, can you help me kind of understand what else might be going on that maybe I can't see? Right? We've talked about things I've seen, but what's going on that I can't see? And then maybe they'll talk with you a little bit. When you ask questions, when you're inviting someone to share their story, it's really important that you ask and then you just wait. And this is where it feels really awkward. Kyle has a great phrase, embrace the awkward. This is where you really need to do that, right? Because we have a natural tendency to try to fill the silence. So if you ask a question, make room for them to answer. Give that space. It could be a little bit, if you really need to say something, if it's gone on for 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and nobody's said anything, you can say, you know what? I understand it can be really hard sometimes to share what's on your mind with somebody. I just want you to know that it's okay. And when you're ready, I'm here to listen. right? And sit there for a few more minutes. Don't get up and walk away, right? Sit there for a few minutes and let them know, I'm really here for you. Like, I really am ready to listen whenever you're ready to talk. Do you have any questions about that, or does that feel awkward to you at all? Some of this kind of comes naturally to youth workers, but okay. And then it's important for us to just listen. If we invite someone to share their story, we then have to stop talking and we have to truly just listen to them share. In this moment, we don't have to ask a lot of questions. If they're sharing, just let them talk. You don't have to understand it all. You don't have to be super clear about it. We're not trying to put together any sort of case or, putting together a story in our minds that we can tell somebody else. We are truly just listening to them and engaged with them in a way that communicates to them. They have our full and undivided attention, right? So minimal responses, just enough to communicate to them that you are listening. So the head nods, the nonverbals, one of the things I teach my students in social work is it's really important to watch your body language, right? If you're not really listening to somebody who's talking, you're not looking at them, you're kind of leaned back typically, you're looking at other things, you're messing with stuff with your hands, you're just really not engaged with them. And so even just the simple act of like leaning forward as someone's talking to you, making sure that you're looking at them, but not in that weird, let me just stare you down kind of way, of just the eye contact and then, oh man, looking away, kind of nodding your head a little bit, doing a little bit of the active listening of okay, so I heard you say that, you've been really stressed out about all the finals coming up and about college and trying to make that decision. Am I hearing that right? And just checking in with them to make sure that you are understanding what they're saying, but not in a way of, okay, well, you said you were really stressed about your finals. And so how many finals do you have? That's not really relevant in the moment. In the moment, what's relevant is they're stressed about it and they don't know what to do with the stress. Does that make sense? So doing enough active listening to demonstrate that you are listening without trying to put a solid framework around the situation or the story. Finally, as youth workers in ministry, it's really important for us to pray with youth, to pray out loud with them, to let them hear us take their concerns to God for them on their behalf. That models for them how they can talk to God about their challenges and their concerns, right? Yeah, for young people, praying feels really scary because it's very abstract. And remember, the brain that hasn't yet fully developed can't wrap its mind around abstract concepts as well as a fully developed brain can. Prayer is very abstract because you don't have that Jesus sitting right in front of you that you can talk to and look in the eye. You're talking into the air, right? Or you're writing a note to somebody who's never going to physically hold it in their hand in your journal. And so prayer with the youth where they can hear you praying for their specific concerns is really helpful because it models to them how they can take their concerns directly to God themselves. After you've prayed with the youth, after you've offered that sort of initial support, it is really important for you to follow up with them a day or two later. And this can be very simple. It can be a phone call. It could be a, hey, you know what? I'd love to take you out for ice cream or just, touch base, spend some time together, whatever. It could be a simple text message of, you know what? I'm still thinking about you since Sunday and just wanted you to know I prayed for you today. Real simple, right? It just communicates that I'm still here. You're still important to me. Nothing that we talked about changed how I feel about you or the fact that I'm willing to pray for you. That's really important to a young person and really validates who they are. And then truly just keep praying for them. You can pray, you can take a couple minutes every Sunday and say, hey, can we just go over in the corner real quick? I just want to keep praying for you because I know how hard it is right now. Or you can keep praying for them and checking in with them every few weeks and say, hey, just want you to know I'm praying for you today. I recently, the girls that I served with for 4 years just graduated. They're all in their freshman year of college or work now. And I regularly will just text them and say, hey, you know what, praying for you today. I know semester just got started. It can often be overwhelming. Just, wanting you to know I'm thinking about you and I'm praying about you. And it communicates to them that they're still important to me, even though they're not right in front of me every week. Right. And that's good for them. They need that. Okay. The last message I have for you is to encourage young people to both ask for help and accept help, right? When they've come to you and shared their story with you, they're asking for help in that moment. They're saying, this is too much. I need to talk to somebody about it. And you may be the person they talk to about it. And that's a real honorable place to be, right? And so honored that they chose to share their story with you. If they need help beyond that, they also will have to choose to be vulnerable in that situation, whether that's talking to their parents or talking to a therapist or a counselor or their doctor, to get those meds that we talked about last week. Asking for help is a really vulnerable place to be. Accepting help is a different kind of scary, but still scary. And so even if you connect that young person back with someone else for some additional support, your follow-up, your continued prayer, your continued, hey, you still matter to me, is really important, because it might be the thing that is helping them to be brave enough to accept the help that's being offered. When we have young people who are really scared to talk to their parents about what they're feeling, it's okay for you to offer to help sit with them while they do that, or for you to offer to help make that first phone call for them. Now, depending on your church situation, as a youth leader, it's probably going to be super important for you to loop in your youth pastor for that. I know personally, I get to serve with Kyle. I've never called a parent about a situation I didn't give Kyle a heads up to, right? Just because I just want to make sure everybody kind of is in the loop on that. But I've had situations where I've encouraged the young person to talk to their parent. And I followed up with the young person, and it wasn't something that I needed to get involved in, but I wanted them to know I was still here and supporting them in that. Yeah, Kyle.
Yeah, I mean, this is where it gets into layers upon layers and legality and all that.
Yeah. So,
one of the things that I wanted to kind of ask about is, so let's say you have a kid and or she's just panicking, okay? But it's a panic attack or something that it's not just, oh, I'm kind of nervous about my test. It's like you can see it's physically on her body and she's panicking and full anxiety. Would you say it's best to have one leader, or would it be like multiple leaders and all that? You said kind of give space with her friends, but what about like a leader? Is it okay for a small group leader, or like you need to have the youth pastor or someone there in that, or is it best to give that time and then they follow up later? Because you kind of mentioned a little bit about that.
You mean like talking with the parent or talking?
I'm talking about calming them down.
Oh, in that moment?
In that moment. And then after that moment, what should be the immediate thing? So let's say the girl is calmed down. So what do you do in that moment? It's like, do you get all the leaders there, or do you handle that situation? Then after the moment, then go tell the youth pastor or something like that? What do you recommend?
I think the person that needs to be in that moment with the youth is the person with whom they have the closest relationship, because that's going to create that sense of safety for them to be able to share. And so it's completely appropriate if, let's say, that student's small group leader is across the room, across campus, whatever, for the small group leader that's standing next to them to deal with it in the moment. But I would recommend saying, hey, could somebody go find, this youth leader and tell them that we need to see him here, because that youth and that youth leader have a good connection. Right? There's some safety there. And so you can have this person who's right there with them work on the grounding stuff and get them kind of back into that place of we are breathing more controlled. We're able to think a little bit differently. We've made space, we've gotten separated, we're not drawing the crowd, we don't have 50 kids around observing, things like that. And then when that other, and we're just kind of hanging out, right? Like, it's okay, we're going to sit here, we'll wait for so-and-so. Now, if the youth starts talking to that youth leader who's right there with them because they're in that moment, that is 100% okay. I say go with it. Right. But typically you're going to want that person with whom they have the closest relationship, just for that safety component, emotional safety component. Does that answer the question? Okay. Okay. So when do I need to make sure that the youth gets more help? My very first, safety is first, always. So anytime there is a safety concern, whether it's suicidality, there's a chance that the youth is hurting themselves or thinking about hurting themselves, killing themselves. And it's okay for you to use the language, are you thinking about killing yourself, with a young person? And that's a question not a lot of people are comfortable with. We usually want to kind of soften it by saying, are you thinking about hurting yourself? I want to encourage you to be really specific. Are you thinking about killing yourself? And the reason we do that is because there's a huge difference between the youth who is cutting and the youth who is suicidal. And so you have to really assess where they are. So if safety is concerned, then you ask for more help. You get that youth connected to more help. Anytime there's an eating disorder kind of situation going on, that's a situation for more help because it's a safety issue. It causes health concerns, right? Anytime you've seen the youth in these same challenging situations for 2 months or more, or it really intensely for even just a couple of weeks, if you're not seeing that youth come out of it and kind of come back to a base, what you know to be their baseline, then I would say ask for help. And then anytime you have any concerns about abuse or neglect happening, and I have a point on this a little bit later, again, that's a safety issue. You got to ask for more help. And so absolutely loop in your youth pastor, your church pastor, and then and as I mentioned here in number 5, make sure that you as a youth leader know what your responsibilities are as a youth ministry worker. Are you a mandated reporter? Are you not? By state law, right? And what does mandated reporting look like? If you are in a mandated reporting state, it's really important for you to know and receive training about what to report and how to make those reports. The report too, when you make a report about suspected abuse or neglect, is always based on your concern or your suspicion. You have absolutely zero responsibility for being able to prove whether or not abuse or neglect is happening. Your only responsibility as a mandated reporter, and I'm being very clear about that, as a mandated reporter, is to have a concern or a suspicion that abuse or neglect might be occurring. It is then up to the authorities to make the determination whether or not to even investigate or to do further assessment on that. You are only reporting, hey, there's something here that feels off to me. I don't know what's going on. I have some questions. It could be this. I don't know. You have an obligation to report under mandated reporting scenarios. So know your own state law and regulations and around that. State law in this regard will trump church policy, though, in terms of mandated reporting, because you can be held accountable legally if you have a suspicion about abuse or neglect and don't report in a state, even if you are not a mandated reporter. So keeping that in mind, safety first and foremost. If there's a safety concern, we get more help, period. Number 2, is the issue bigger than you? Have you talked with this young person? Are you enough? Are you at the point where you're really feeling stuck, right? Do they keep coming back to you about the same thing over and over and over again? And you've offered support and you've been there and you're giving them time and attention, but now you're feeling really stuck and you just feel like we're not getting anywhere with it. It's probably time to loop in somebody else, right? To kind of talk it through, what should our next steps be? want to be realistic. There are some liability risks. Anytime you're talking to a minor about their mental health challenges, and well, really with any person, there are some liability risks. And so it is important for you to have a chain of communication with your youth pastor, with your lead pastor, with your camp director, you know, things like that, because there are some liability risks depending on what the youth has shared and what they're experiencing if we don't take certain actions. And so you want to make sure that the people who are sort of in charge and maybe more aware of those liability risks, that they are made aware of it as appropriate. And then finally, if the youth's peers are talking to you really consistently about their concerns for the youth, and you're not able to get the youth to engage with you directly, it might be time to loop in some other folks and maybe explore getting some additional help with that, because the peers are really aware of what's going on. And if you've made effort to get that young person to talk with you and they're just not, but the peers are still concerned, it's at least enough to make sure parents are aware or somebody else is aware that there are concerns. So just kind of some tips there for discerning that. Are there any questions on when do I get more help? When do I loop in somebody else? Okay. Well, I know this has been a very, very brief sort of overview of a very intense topic. I wanted to make sure you all have my email address. I'm open to have you emailing me. We can connect for a one-on-one phone call or conversation with you, your church, your youth group, your leadership, whatever. And I know, like if you have a situation where you want some additional training for the people that work in your youth ministry, feel free to reach out. We can make that happen. Kyle and I both, through the USMB stuff, we can figure that out. We want to make sure people are equipped and empowered to be able to love on our youth the way God's called them to. So are there any final questions or concerns?
Well, thank you, Serena. Sometimes it's you process something, or maybe you remember a slide and you have some questions later. So that is always available. Also, I do want to point out that if you have another topic with more webinar stuff, we are kind of moving into that realm. I see Shelley, and moving into that realm of, okay, what else do we need to help? Because a lot of it, we have a lot of cool and very competent people in our denomination who could help with that concerning teenagers or anything else. So, Shelley, let's get to your question first.
Well, just as parents, this kind of stuff is helpful, but like parenting, when you have youth that have mental health challenges, I've not done a lot of digging yet, but I always want to be careful that, it's a resource that I feel like would support, our faith and not, kind of like bypass it, but maybe incorporate it more. And so I'd be curious if there's something for parents that you know about, or if we want to even expand it to that kind of thing. And it's interesting that we talk about the importance of normalizing this, and we all probably would nod our heads and say, yeah, that's so important. But yet, where are all the people that are trying to like learn and normalize?
Yeah.
So we have a lot of work to do in our churches, and I don't know. Yeah. Like even in my own church, there's these conversations that happen between moms on the side, and we're like, oh, okay, it's good to talk to you, because I didn't realize that's how, like you when we find each other, we're like, oh, you're dealing with that too. Okay. And then who's talking about this? Because our kids are like, I don't want you to out all my stuff to all the people who know me. And so that's the trick. How do we do, I feel like I have to find people not in my church to talk to for me, but that doesn't normalize it either. So. Right.
Yeah. And I do think the church, like the big universal church, is doing a better job in more recent years of acknowledging that these kinds of conversations need to happen. I think we still have a long way to go, but they're happening. And so this conversation is one way that we're doing that. I agree with you. Parents need these same kinds of skills and needing to know that it's okay for them to reach out and ask for help. I would love to see us get to a place where churches have a spot on their website that says, hey, these are some clinicians, these are some counselors in our area that we feel good about, that, you know, and have resources available right there on the church's website that says, we are supportive of you seeking out these services. We know that sometimes you need it, but we're still here for you, right? Like prayer doesn't stop being important just because you're in counseling. They don't invalidate, or they don't negate one another, right? We don't do one and not the other. We can do them together. And that's where real healing and hope can come from. And so, I would be up for a parent workshop too, because I think it is important.
Yeah,
definitely.
Or what if we did, like, this makes me think about, like, what are services we can offer our community? Like, what if we had, like, it could even be a webinar, and it could be live or not live, but we could be like, here's something that we're offering. Anybody come attend, and you encourage church members to come, but you know, like, they can invite, you know, I'm just thinking like parents inviting parents.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would just kind of wrap up with this, but I do say the future, even though it looks bleak, it's actually more hopeful. Partly because I'm noticing the different generations speak about mental health differently. The older generations, it's somewhat on the extreme taboo to even talk about it. But as Gen Z and millennials are kind of filtering into the higher leaders of the church, this kind of stuff is becoming more and more normal, whether it's just practical because more people talking about it, or more people are accepting on that. So I think it's going to be very interesting in the next 10 years how the leadership changing is moving from boomers to Gen Xers and millennials in that.
Yeah. And some sort of way to hopefully bring some of the older generation. Like, I think about my parents, like how would they, you know, is that feeling of like, oh, we just need to pray more.
Right.
Well,
and
I'll
part of it, but not the only thing.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to leave my email address. Kyle, you have it. I'll email you the PowerPoint so you can share it even with the people who have attended. And, you know, I know you're going to post the videos, but I have another appointment here that I need to get to. So thank you all so much for taking time out of your weeks to come and have this conversation. And it communicates how important it is. And I just want to say thanks, because I know it's a big deal. It's not easy. So
thank you, Serena. Thank you, everyone else. See ya.
All right. Bye-bye.